When I was in school, my favorite subjects were English and history. History number one, English number two. Math was always trouble for me. And I could get it, but I had to have a lot of help. From my teachers, from fellow students, a lot of help. I wanted to go to college, and so I knew I had to take 5 years of math, so I took all 5 years of math, but I still struggled with it. And so math is still somewhat of a struggle for me. And last evening, I needed some help. My wife had to help me. As soon as I got to the foyer back there, she pulled me down and whispered something in my ear. I thought she was going to whisper some sweet somethings or something. And instead she said, 55. I said, what? She said, we've been married 55 years, not 56. So we have been married 55 years as of last June and not 56. And she said, you owe the church an apology. I'm sorry. Didn't mean to mislead you. And then she said, it just seems like 56 or longer. And I thought, well, you're not helping matters at all. But anyway, we have been married 55 years, not 56. No, and she did not even say, that's one. No, I got to sleep in the bed last night, and the house wasn't cold today, so no, she forgave me. But she didn't say, probably next time she'll say, that's one. That's one. And then two more? Is that what you're wishing for? Okay. And I thought you were my friend.
No, that's a good woman. That's a good woman.
Well, that's a good woman. Yes, she is a good woman. Yes, she is. I'll fill you in later. No, she is. I want us to go this evening to Deuteronomy chapter 6. And I want us to read for our text verses 4 through 9. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 9. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God. The Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be a frontal on your forehead. You shall write them on the doorpost of your house and on your gates. The Lord said, this is the important thing you need to remember, that the Lord is your God. And I want you to teach your children that. I want them to be impressed. I want them to see that when they get up. I want them to hear that when they sit down, when they rise. I want them to see that as they walk out the door. I want that to be in front of them. I want them to understand that I am the Lord God, and I'm the one to be served. And I'm giving you the responsibility of impacting them with that. There's a poem that I'm sure you've heard this and read it, but it has always impacted me as a parent. And I've tried to use it to impact others with the same feeling, with the same impression. That is the tremendous responsibility that we have when God blesses us with a son or with a daughter. That is a happy time of our life. We celebrate, but it's also a very serious time of our life, because at that point begins one of the greatest responsibilities that God gives to man. To begin preparing that child for life, but more importantly, for an eternity with God. That is a tremendous, serious responsibility. It's a great privilege. It's an entrustment, but it's a tremendous responsibility. And one of the poems that really has helped me over the years and to really understand the importance of that role is one that, again, like I said, you've probably heard, probably read, maybe even memorized. It's entitled The Sculptor. I took a piece of plastic clay and idly fashioned it one day. And as my fingers pressed it still, it moved and yielded to my will. I came again when days were past. The bit of clay was hard at last. The form I gave it still it bore, but I could change that form no more. I took a piece of living clay and gently fashioned it one day. I molded it with power and art, a young child's soft and yielding heart. I came again when years were gone. It was a man I looked upon. He still that early impress bore, and I could change him nevermore. I remember when I was about 3 or 4 years old, we moved to southern part of West Virginia. Behind our house was a road that went out to an oil well. And us kids would go out there and play on it. And in the bank, there was some soft clay. And my brother was always an artist. He was very good with his hands. I remember his taking some of that clay and mixing some water with it. And he molded a plate. And he did a good job. He was only at that time about 7 or 8 years old, but did a very good job. And I thought, Larry, that's great. Well, Larry was always one of these that he always wanted to be able to improve what he made. So he rolled it up in a ball. And then he began shaping something else. And pretty soon he had a nice looking cup. And he set it there. It was better than the plate. And then that afternoon he came back and he didn't like quite the looks of it, and so he started to roll in the ball again, and he couldn't. And I understood then, as I read this poem, putting those two experiences together, reading this poem and that experience, that you can work with something for a while, like a piece of clay, you can mold it, and you can shape it, and do pretty much what you want to with it. But then after a while, it reaches a point where it gets harder and harder and harder, and you can't shape it anymore. That's what it's like raising a child, isn't it? That when they're young, they're pliable, they're soft, they're impressionable, and we can teach them and work with them. But then they reach a point where they're harder to work with. And then they keep getting harder and harder, and they get to the point where you can hardly work with them at all. I remember taking our daughter with Judy to the doctor, a pediatrician, when she was just a baby. And we asked him, how soon can we take her out, take her to church? He said, well, I always recommend all of my patients, they not take their children to church until they're about 2 years old because of all the germs that are out there. And I said, Dr. Morris, I said, I don't agree with you. I said, because that child, if they wait that long to be taken to church, they don't know how to act when they get there. Because by that time, they're already learning behavior. And I said, I think they need to be taken as soon as they possibly can be taken. Because then they learn how to behave. They learn some of the things that parents do and moms and dads do and adults do and what we're supposed to do in worshiping God. They're impressionable, even though they may not understand, they're impressionable. If you wait till they're 2 years old, you've lost 2 valuable years. That's pretty much the way I said it that day. He said, well, Everett, he said, I never thought about that. I'll have to think about that one some more. And I hope he did over the years. I hope he didn't make that recommendation over the years. And if he did, I hope the parents didn't listen to him. Because you're missing 2 good, formidable years of a child's life in those first 2 years. From the time they come to the world, they're impressionable. And we need to begin working with them. I remember about 20 years ago, standing at the foot of a casket of a boy who had been killed in an accident, a car accident. He was about 18 or 19 years old. his dad and I were standing there, and his dad had been coming to services some. He'd grown up in the church. His brother was very active in the church there. His sister-in-law was, and his mother was. His dad had been, his dad became ill. And this man had fallen away. And this boy had grown up without any faith. And his dad said, Everett, he said, I know. And I was always taught, in order to go to heaven, you have to be baptized. He said he wasn't baptized. Will he go to heaven? What I wanted to say to him was, you waited too long. You didn't give him that role model. You didn't teach him when he was younger, when he was impressionable, when you had him at home. And you chose to marry a woman that had no interest in serving God. The choice you have made that boy's choice. That's what I wanted to say to him. But I knew he was already in too much pain. I thought, no, that's not the thing to say. It's not the time nor place. He knows that. So I said the best thing I could say to him at the time. I said, well, we know God's a merciful God, and God will do what's right. And he was satisfied with that, though he knew what I wanted to say. He knew the answer. And I felt so badly for him. I wanted to be able to say, yeah, he's going to be okay. But I couldn't based on the scriptures. But he'd waited too long. He was a sculptor, as I was a sculptor of 3 children, along with my wife. He didn't take advantage of when that child was pliable, and he waited too long. We read in Deuteronomy 6, keep that always before them. In Ephesians chapter 6, verse 4, it says, fathers, don't provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the nurture and admonition of the Lord. And the nurture means in the feeding process. Feed them. Admonish them in things that pertain to the Lord. What does that mean? What does that entail? What does that involve? Well, that involves my looking at my own life first. I don't know how many of you, I'm sure you've heard this poem. I'm not going to read it out. We don't have time for that this evening. But it was written by Dorothy Law Nolte in 1954. And it's entitled, Children Learn What They Live. And I'll just read you the first couple lines, and maybe you can recognize it and fill in later. If you want to read this later, you can. It says, if children live with criticism, they learn to condemn. If children live with hostility, they learn to fight. If children live with fear, they learn to be apprehensive. If children live with ridicule, they learn to feel shy. And it goes on down through. And the idea of that poem, that piece of prose, is that children learn what they live with. Children learn what they see. Somebody said one time, lessons are better caught than taught. Children learn more from what they see than what they hear. We may teach them the scriptures. We may teach them what is right and what is wrong. And that helps, that's necessary. But the greatest lesson is what they see in your life and in your spouse's life and in the grandparents' life, which many of us are in that category right now. And so you and I have the opportunity, by just our lives, saying, this is what is important. This is what nourishes you in the Lord. This is the admonition that I want to give you in the Lord. Look at me. And look at the mistakes I've made as well, because they are there too. But what do we need to model? What do we need to put out there so they can catch it instead of just being taught it? What nourishment can we give to them? What do we need to keep before them? I want to give you 5 or 6 things to think about. Don't get scared. We're not going to talk a long time about each one of them. But 5 or 6 things. And this is the beginning point. And I don't care what other things you add to it. This is always the beginning. This is the foundation. Teach them by word and by example a respect for God. Teach them that God is the most important person, most important being in your life. You teach them that by choosing the Lord over extra money at the job. You teach them that by saying the Lord is more important than sports, more important than that hunting trip, more important than that weekend at the lake, more important than anything else. When I'm thinking about doing something in my life, what does the Lord want me to do? How can I better serve the Lord here? How can we as a family unit better serve the Lord if I take this job? Or if we move here, if we move there? Or if you go to school here or you go to school there? How can you and I, how can we as a family better serve the Lord here than we can where we are right now? If we're going to make a change, how is that going to help us draw closer to the Lord? But see, that's not where we usually look. Where we usually look is it going to provide more things for us? Is it going to give us a more comfortable standard of living? Is it going to give me a bigger paycheck? Is it going to help us live in a nicer house, drive a nicer car, have more friends? And we forget, don't forget, we put it way down the list. Well, can I serve God there? Is there a family of God there? Is that family going to be able to help me? I remember when I first started preaching, there was a couple in our congregation that had raised their children. The third child was a boy. He had just left home. He was about 19 years of age. And none of the children were faithful to the Lord. And I remember the wife saying to me one day, he said, when we moved here, I wasn't really for that because the church wasn't very strong. As a matter of fact, when they moved there was no church. He helped start the church there. And she said to her, I will never move anywhere again where there's not a strong body of the Lord's people. That is so important, but you see, that's not what a lot of people look at. But the children need to understand that is important. And also, they need to be taught a respect for God when they choose their mate. I have tried for years to get young people to see that. I've tried for years to get young people to see that that person you choose to marry is going to help determine your eternity. And it's going to help to determine the eternity of any children that is brought into that union. And the older I get, and the more people I talk to, the more people I have counseled, the more I'm convinced of that. I did a study at St. Clairsville when I was there of couples who married Christians, people who married non-Christians. And this study was over a period of 37 years. And I went back through my records, and I counted the number of people that had married from that congregation that were Christians, and who they married, non-Christians or Christians. And I looked, are they still faithful? Are they still together? And I followed their lives. I pretty much knew all of them and what had happened. Let me give you some of the results of that study. There were 153 members involved that got married during those 37 years. So there were 109 marriages. 65 of them married non-Christians. 88 were Christians marrying Christians. So it's 44 couples that married Christians. Over the years, Those that stopped attending altogether among those who married non-Christians, 35 out of the 65. That's 53%. Christians who married Christians, 20 stopped coming. That's 23%. Those who attend average of once a week, 25 out of the 65 who married non-Christians, and 62 out of those who married Christians still were coming at 71%. 71% were still faithfully serving the Lord. 15 of those who were Christians who married non-Christians got a divorce. That's 23%. 6 of those who Christians married Christians got a divorce. That's a little under 7%. 14 of Christians who married non-Christians converted their mates. That's 22%. And what that says is that if you want to stack the deck in your favor, you want to help yourself get to heaven, marry a child of God. I remember hearing one time, a long, long time ago, if you marry a child of the devil, that is a non-Christian, then you're going to have trouble with your father-in-law. Think about that one. You're going to have trouble raising your kids because, see, you're yoked together. And if you're going the same direction, you get somewhere. But if you have going in two different directions, you have two different worldviews, you're going two separate directions and you're not getting anywhere. And your children are the collateral damage. They're the ones that get hurt the most. And so in teaching them a respect for God, impress upon them the need, the importance of marrying a Christian. You say, Everett, we live in an area where there aren't very many Christians to choose from. Expose your children to youth rallies, to retreats, to church camps, to Christian colleges. Get them where there are other Christians where they can meet. Now, that doesn't guarantee success. I'm not saying that it does. You can say, well, Everett, I married a Christian, a person was baptized, and my marriage didn't work out. Okay, there are exceptions to that. But here, 72% of those Christians who married Christians stayed faithful to the Lord. So it's in your favor to make that choice. It's in your children's favor to make that choice. So impress upon them the importance of that. Now, I know the reaction. I've seen it over and over again. That's not important. I remember teaching teenagers back in the late 70s. I remember having a classroom of kids, 25 to 30 kids at a time, and I would stress this, and they would laugh about it. They thought that was ridiculous. Several years later, as they started getting married, several of them came back and said to me, Everett, in class, we laughed at you when you said that to us. But now, with all the problems we've gone through with our non-Christian mates, we understand. And I thought, I wish you would have listened to me back then. I didn't say I told you so. That's not the time nor the place to do that. But I thought, I wish you would have listened. And so I haven't stopped preaching that message, and I won't stop preaching that message until the day I die, because I know what it's like to be married to a Christian for 55 years. And it is not always easy, but it's sure a lot easier being married to a non-Christian, because I look at people that are married to non-Christians and I see the struggles they go through, and I don't want that. So we began by respecting the Lord ourselves and teaching them to do the same thing. Putting the Lord in front at the top of the list when they're trying to make a decision about anything in their life. And then you teach them to respect others. Respect others, beginning with their siblings, to respect their space, to respect their room, to respect their personal property, to respect their wishes and what they want to do, and to help them to understand that they're not the only ones in that family. And they need to respect the other person, and whenever they cross that boundary, they need to learn how to say, I'm sorry. That's part of respect. I was wrong. That's part of respect. Because it says, I am considering your feelings, and I respect those feelings. And let me tell you one thing that you and I as parents and as grandparents can do more than probably anything else to teach them respect for other people is respect our spouses and never speak disrespectfully of them or to them. Our oldest son was a lot like me, stubborn, strong-willed, opinionated, always thought he was right. And so he and I butted heads a lot. And I was learning with him. You know, he was the first one. You know, the second one gets a little bit better. The third one, you get a little bit better, and you think you got it all together, and you mess up with that one as well. But I was learning with the first one. And so we butted heads a lot. He had a mouth on him, and he used that mouth in the wrong way. He didn't give me much back talk because he knew that wouldn't be tolerated. That wouldn't pass muster. But he would with Judy. And I remember one day walking to the house, and he was giving Judy a rough time in the dining room. He was giving her a lot of back talk. And I went into the dining room as quickly as I could get there, and I stepped between him and Judy. And I got about this far from his face. And I said, David, I want you to understand something. That's my wife you're talking to. That's the girl I married. That's the woman I love. And you will never, never speak to her like that again. And he never did. A couple years later, he was going to High Valley College, university later. He was going to High Valley College at that time. And he and his girlfriend, they'd been dating for a couple years. They were very serious about each other. And they were having some trouble. And they kind of separated. I remember going down to pick up Dave for the weekend. And he was on work study, so his responsibility part of it was to sweep out the chapel area, the old auditorium. And I remember going in there and helping him. I'd move the chairs, he'd sweep, and we were talking. And we got to talking about the relationship he had with this girl, because he was really hurting. He said, Dad, he said, do you remember a couple years ago in the dining room there in St. Clairsville when I was giving Mom a rough time, and you came in and you said to me, that's my wife, that's the woman I love, and you will never talk to her like that again? I said, yeah, I remember that very well. He said, well, that's the way I feel about this girl. I love her that much, and I respect her, and I don't want to lose her. You see, he got the message, and he didn't marry that girl. He later married another girl, and they were married about 14 years, and that marriage didn't work out. It was very sad. But I never saw him speak disrespectfully to her or about her, even when they were going through the divorce. He's married a second time. Never have I seen him speak disrespectfully to her or speak disrespectfully about her. He got the message that you respect other people. And now he's a professor in a university. And he wants that respect from his students, and he gets it for the most part, I think, from what I hear, what I see. So we need to teach them a respect for other people, a consideration of other people, which brings me to the third point, and that is we need to teach them compassion. Compassion simply means in the Greek to feel with somebody, to teach them how does that feel to be spoken to like that. You put yourself in that person's shoes and say, how would I want to be addressed? How would I want to be dealt with? How would I want people to talk about me? How would I want people to treat me? From the time they're toddlers and they're siblings, and they're playing there on the floor and they're fighting over a toy, and one takes the toy from the other one. One of the best things we can do is to get down with that one child that's taking the toy away from the other child and say, would you want them to do that to you? No. Well, you shouldn't do it to them either. Or when they come home and they're talking about this or that person in a negative way, would you want people to talk to you or about you like that? No. Well, don't you think that you shouldn't talk about that person that way either? So we need to teach them respect for that person. We need to teach them compassion for that person, to feel with that person, to say, how would I want to be treated? And that goes a long way as they prepare for marriage, because compassion is so essential in a marriage relationship. The wife needs to ask about the husband. If I were my husband, how would I want to be treated? A husband needs to ask about his wife. If I were my wife, how would I want to be treated? How would I want them to talk to me? How would I want them to spend time with me? Would I want to be left alone all the time? Would I want them to yell at me and cuss me and scream at me and sadly to say, even hit me? Would I want that? No, 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 no. So compassion is so essential in any relationship, and our children need to learn that. And they need to learn that from mom and dad and from grandma and grandpa, by watching how grandma and grandpa and mom and dad treat each other. And they're considerate of each other, they're compassionate toward each other. And then, and I want to go to a passage we were looking at a couple of nights ago, because this one is so essential with compassion, and then the next one as well. Ephesians chapter 4. And we just briefly looked at this, but let's apply it in connection with compassion and then the next point as well. So let no unwholesome word proceed from your mouth, but only such a word as is good for edification. We need to always ask, when we're talking to our wives, we're talking to our husbands, we're talking to our children, we're talking to our parents, does it build them up? Does it build them up? Constructive criticism does, but destructive criticism does not. According to the need of the moment, so that it will give grace to those who hear. Then skipping down to verse 31, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander be put away from you, along with all malice. Be kind to one another, tenderhearted, forgiving each other, just as God in Christ also has forgiven you. Now, we apply that in the church. That's how we should treat our brothers and sisters. That's how we should treat others. Boy, if there's any place this applies, it's in the home. Anything we say should be said to build up. It should give grace to the hearers. It should be without bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and slander. It should be kind. It should be tenderhearted, forgiving. The last conversation you have with your spouse, last conversation you have with your children, with your parents, does this characterize it? If not, what we need to do is repent of that and try better the next time. And remember this passage. This is compassion. Because that's how we want to be dealt with. That's how we want to be talked to. Compassion says, I'll do that for the other person as well. But then he says in this passage, in verse 32, to be tenderhearted. Children need to learn to be tender, even our boys. Tender implies sensitivity. Well, girls are sensitive, sometimes overly sensitive. Boys need to be sensitive too. Sensitive simply means aware of other people's feelings. I don't care what people feel. Well, you're insensitive. We need to be sensitive. We need to be tenderhearted. We need to say, I do care about what other people feel. I do care about how this affects other people. I do care about what this does to other people. I want to be tenderhearted. Julian Lennon, who is the son of John Lennon, the Beatle, he was raised by his mother. John Lennon left his first wife when Julian was only 5 years old. And I read an interview of Julian several years ago. And they were talking about various things in his life, but they also talked about his dad, John and the Beatle. And I want to read just 2 or 3 paragraphs of this, of Julian's response and feelings toward his dad. He said, the only thing he taught me was how not to be a father. I hope my children never said that about me. And I'm sure they had a right to at times. I made a lot of mistakes. And I've done a lot of apologizing in the time they've been away from home. Because I don't want that. The only thing he taught me was how not to be a father. So when Julian first hit the music charts in 1984, he was 21, and his father had been dead for just 4 years. Julian was still grappling with it, the writer says. He was expressing remorse, not anger. But now, anger is helping Julian come to terms with his lineage. His father and mother, Cynthia, split when he was 5. He saw his dad another dozen times or so. He walked out the door and was never around, Julian said. I admired him on TV, listened to his words and opinions, but for someone who was praised for peace and love and wasn't able to keep that at home, that's hypocrisy. That's sad. That's sad that a man who could have had such an influence on other people and did in many ways, many times negative, he didn't even have a positive impact on his own son. A lack of tenderheartedness. One of my greatest memories, my favorite memories as a father, was something that I didn't realize at the time. As I told you, my oldest son and I, we didn't always agree. We butted heads a lot. And our oldest son was not a very emotional child as far as expressive of his emotions. When he was little, you try to hug him, he'd just kind of jerk away from you. He didn't like that, very uncomfortable with that. Rarely, if ever, and I can't recall his ever as a little boy saying, "Daddy, I love you." Well, that was not manly. That was not what a boy should say. And he was very much into athletics. He was a very good athlete, but very much of a jock, I might add. And so I went through his teen years like that. But I'll never forget, and this is the memory that I've got. We were sitting in a car, just him and me. We were sitting at a traffic light in Circleville. I could still recall it was on North Court Street and High Street. And we sat there, we had the radio on. And Mike and the Mechanics had a song out that year called "In the Living Years." And I listened to it several times. I really liked the song. And Dave, who was not very expressive in this line at all, he said, "Dad," he said, "do you know what that song's saying, what that song's about?" And I said, "No, I really don't." I said, "I've listened to it a lot, but I haven't really listened to the words." He said, "Well, it's about his son telling his dad they loved him while he was still alive in the living years." And he stopped. And I didn't know what he was getting at. But sometime later, and I think this was 2 or 3 years later, I got to thinking about that conversation, that traffic light. And I realized what Dave was trying to say. For the first time, "Dad, I love you." You see, he was not a tender-hearted person. But that day, he was trying to be tender-hearted. And it took me a while to understand what he was doing. Now, when we see each other, it's a hug, it's an embrace. When we talk to each other on the phone, the last thing we say to each other is, "I love you," and he usually says it first. When we go to visit, he's very quick to give us a hug, very quick to tell me, "Dad, I love you." He finally understood, I need to be tender-hearted. And he is. He's a very tender-hearted man. He wasn't as a boy, very hard-hearted, very tender-hearted as a man. Let's teach our children that by showing that, especially as fathers, that men can be and should be tender-hearted, sensitive. And then another thing, teach them gratitude. Teach them how to say thanks. Teach them how to be grateful. I remember when I was in 2nd or 3rd grade, I can't remember exactly which age it was, But I was in love. Oh, was I in love with Susan Taylor. Susan was a little blonde, blue-eyed girl, rich. Her dad owned a local lumber company. Lived in a nice brick house right across from the school building. I mean, she was cute. And I had eyes for Susan Taylor. But the problem was, Susan Taylor had eyes for my best friend, Bus Cook. And that tore my heart out. No matter what I did, I could not turn her eyes toward me. But when one day she invited me to her birthday party, I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I got to go to Susan's birthday party. We played games. Her mom and dad gave us prizes. I won the last game, and the only prize was left was a set of jacks. You know what jacks are? You know, the little rubber ball with a little star, metal stars. I was a boy. I didn't want a set of jacks. What am I going to do with jacks? And so I sulked. I didn't say thank you. I just went off and sulked. I pouted. Susan came over and said, "I'm sorry, Mom didn't have anything else left." She was a very sensitive girl. Her mom even came over to me and said, "Everett, I'm sorry, we didn't have anything else." And I wouldn't give an inch. I just pouted. And she said, "Well, if you give me back the jacks, I'll give you a dime." And of course, that's what they cost. They cost a dime at that time. I said, "Okay." I took the dime. For some reason or the other, I was never invited back to her birthday parties in the future. And I didn't understand why. But after a few years, I thought, Everett, you were not invited back because you were ungrateful. Shakespeare said one time, he said, "How sharper than a serpent's tooth it is to have a thankless child." And isn't that true? We need to teach our children gratitude, appreciation for what they have, by saying to our wife, to our spouse, to them, "Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you." And then a fourth one, not a fourth one, but a fifth one. Teach them responsibility. Teach them that they make a commitment, they keep that commitment. Teach them that they're responsible for their own property. There was a family at St. Clairsville. There was a blended family. There were 8 kids and parents. They lived in a small house. And so their house was always a mess. So Mom and Dad decided they were going to form a Saturday box, because the kids were all the time leaving their stuff lying around. What the Saturday box was, that if they left anything lying around after they'd been told to pick it up, then it went into the Saturday box. And it stayed in the Saturday box until Saturday. They lost privileges of being able to use or play with that, whatever it was, or wear that, whatever it was, until that Saturday. And the parents never told me this, but the children told me. And they said, we started picking our things up. They were being taught responsibility. Teach your children to keep commitment. If you make a promise, or if you make a commitment, keep that, or explain why you couldn't, and make sure it's a good reason. Because your children are watching you. That same family, their dad worked in a steel mill. Now, Dad didn't always want to go to work. He was a good worker, but didn't want to work any extra shifts. So he would tell his kids, if the plant calls, tell them I'm not here. And when they told me that, I thought, you have got to be kidding me. Because what you're teaching your children is you don't have to keep your commitments, and you can lie to get out of them, because they were committed to work overtime. And you know something? I had a lot of trouble with those kids in our youth group, because I could never believe what they said. And I wonder why. Because Dad had taught them it's okay not to fulfill your responsibilities, not to keep your commitments. It's okay to even lie to get out of them. Parents, let's teach them responsibility. Let's teach them that they make a commitment, they follow through on it. I admire a parent When a child wants to go out for a sport or wants to join band or join a club, I admire the parent that says to the child, after a month or two, and the child says, I don't want to go anymore, that parent says, no, you're going to finish out the season. Now, they may be miserable, and you might be miserable in making them go. But what you're teaching them is that if you make a commitment, you're going to follow through on that commitment. And you don't clean up after them. You don't make excuses for them. You may help them clean up, you may help them recover, but you don't cover up for them. Because they need to learn that if I make a mistake, then I've got to clean it up. If I make a mistake, I've got to recover. Because some of these days, Mom and Dad's not going to be there to do that for me. So I've got to learn how to do it. And we've got to teach them how. So you and I are sculptors. Still, even if our children are growing, we're sculpting. We're sculpting by setting the proper example of loving God first, of respecting others, and speaking respectfully of others, even those that we disagree with, even our government officials. Because kids pick up on that too. Of teaching them compassion, by being compassionate. By teaching them responsibility, by teaching them gratitude, by teaching them tenderness, by being all those things ourselves. And also teaching them, and this is very important, that it may hurt, but it's not wrong or never a mistake to say, I made a mistake. I'm sorry. I have gone to my oldest son especially, several times, several different occasions, had several conversations since he left home. And many a time I've said to him, Dave, I am sorry. I'm sorry I made the mistakes that I did in raising you. And he would say, when he was younger, he said, Dad, yeah, you did. But now he says, Dad, that's okay. I learned from them. I learned from them. And so sometimes we've got to say, I'm sorry. And sometimes in life, we've got to say that. Sometimes when we realize that we've made a mistake in trying to serve God, we need to realize that it's okay and necessary to say, I'm sorry. And it's also okay to ask for help. And we need to teach our children that. And you may need help this evening. You may need help with a struggle you're going through in your life. You may need our prayers, which is the greatest source of help that there is. And you want to ask for that this evening, we're going to sing an invitation song to give you an opportunity to come to the front and ask for that. Or if you're not a Christian, you want to be baptized into Christ, Trevor will be glad to assist you with that this evening. So if you have any need at all, as together we stand and sing, come to the front and make that desire known. We're glad to try to serve you and help you.